Hello again. This is Nick Roach, and there are ducks in the background. This talk is entitled, Have You Suffered Enough? Now at this point I'm going to apologise to followers of Barry Long, who was a great teacher and the teacher whose teachings that I followed. Now in my path I've made it my own, and in everything I've said before I've always been a little bit cautious to try and make sure I'm not repeating his words. Barry always said, when you realise something for yourself and talk from your own experience, the teaching is then yours. The experience is yours and you're saying it because you know it. Nevertheless, I've tried to avoid using his words. I've used my own words. But he often used to say, have you suffered enough? And I can't think of a better way to summarise it. So, when I found this, I was only 18 years old, extremely unhappy, struggling with life and living. And when he taught that one is responsible, that I was responsible for my own unhappiness. Sorry, there's flies all attracted by the lights. That I was responsible for my own unhappiness, both within and the external situation. And he taught how to make emotion conscious, which has been described in other videos. Literally dissolving the emotion inside, and the situation outside is dissolved, but that's created by the same energy. As within, so without. It's all the same. So immediately I got this, I started doing it, I began dissolving emotion, and that was it for me. And I kept hearing Barry saying, have you suffered enough? You have to have suffered enough to want to give up suffering. And these were always just words to me. I didn't need to hear them. They weren't necessary, because I was doing it because actually I had suffered enough. I'd had so much pain, so much unhappiness, that I was not prepared to take any more. None. Every time I was unhappy in any way, any sense of emotional disturbance, straight away my mind goes, what's that? What's that? I'm not having that in me. I'm not living unhappy any longer. I'm not having that. Even at 18 years old, I was not prepared to put up with it. And here I am, 44 now as we speak, and I'm sharing it and teaching it with others, teaching it to others. And the process to me has been a very simple, steady, dissolving emotion every day, week, month, year for 25 years. And even now, here I am, but I'm still here. And despite what some people might claim about once you get to a point, there's nothing else to do, there's no more emotion. Actually there is emotion, because the emotion is still in the background creating the environment. So the same process continues. One just doesn't have to work at it anymore, it's just happening by itself, but it is still the same process, it's still happening. So for me it's been very steady, very straightforward. And then I start teaching it and sharing it. And my spiritual autobiography, which I kept notes, records, like a spiritual diary for 25 years, the whole journey's in there. And I thought, well, people will get this and go, wow, this is how to do it. It works. But I'm finding, so little flies everywhere, little midges. But I'm finding very, very few people are actually willing to do it. When I get the reviews back from the autobiography, very few have said, I can see dissolving emotion is the way to go, and I'm now doing it. But these people are definitely interested in the spiritual path, very much interested. But very few, it seems, are taking the time to be conscious, to be aware, and dissolve the emotion. Noises behind me. And of course it occurred to me, why is that? Why aren't people who are really serious about learning about the spiritual path, understanding how everything is connected, becoming at one with everything, realizing themselves as pure love, realizing everything as their own reflection, wherever their aim is, they want to get rid of problems and worries in their lives and have a peaceful existence, whatever it is that's driving them, the answer is simply to practice being aware, but particularly in the face of an emotional situation, and dissolve the emotion. You're dissolving the unconscious energy, which is what emotion is, the separation. You can feel it. You wouldn't be able to feel it if it wasn't separate. You're feeling the unconscious. With your awareness, you're feeling the unconscious energy, the emotion, and you're making it conscious by moving into it. You become more conscious because of that. More self-aware. Each and every single time you do it. So why isn't everyone doing it? And I assumed people weren't doing it because they didn't know about this. And then you think, so just tell people, just be conscious when there's emotion, and you will, over time, you'll become more and more self-aware, and eventually self-realized, enlightened, God-realized, whatever term you want, you will be there, simply by remaining conscious when there's emotion. That's it. And yet, no one, very few, no one's doing it. No one wants to do it. And of course, it then comes back to what Barry used to say, have you suffered enough? No matter how much suffering one has had, how much unhappiness, how many awful, terrible, horrific things have happened in their lives, and some people have had truly terrible, traumatic, horrific things, is it enough to make them say, I'm not going to have unhappiness in my body any longer? I am not prepared to be unhappy any longer. Because that's what it takes. That's what it takes to dissolve emotion, and make it conscious. That knowledge, that strength inside, that I'm not prepared to be unhappy any longer. I'm not prepared to blame other people for when I feel unhappy, when I feel down, when I feel angry. I'm not prepared to blame anybody or anything else for my life and how I feel, because it's mine. And I will dissolve it. I will face it. I will get rid of it. I'm not going to have this in me. I will not accept unhappiness. But you can't do that through conscious effort and will, which almost makes this recording irrelevant if you can't do it through choice. But then in some ways one could say that about the whole process, so we have to continue. So just worth looking at. The spiritual life is just itself a phrase used for becoming more conscious and more self-aware. And people can do all sorts of practices or believe there is no practice and method. But ultimately, the journey, whether one is aware of it or not, is about being more conscious and less emotional. About the emotion being made conscious. And that's a lot like one's heart beating. Whether you know about your heart, whether you're aware of it or not, it still beats. The separation here is the emotion creating the sense of separation, creating its own appearance within the one mind. And it's that emotion that is being lived. And when one starts to connect with the being, the stillness within, it's that same emotion that is being dissolved. So one is dissolving the need and the actual separation. Just by being conscious, one is dissolving the very energy that's creating the environment. And that's happening even if you're not aware of it. An enlightened person who's self-aware in the moment, through no effort of their own, just doing it, when emotion comes up, it arises and evaporates. And they'll describe that to you. That's the emotion being made conscious. They're just not doing it through any effort. It happens. Some people become enlightened or self-realized through some awful emotional trauma. And suddenly the emotion goes, oh, had enough, I can't take it any longer. It just gives up. And that's it. So it can happen to somebody all at once, up to the point that it happens. But it just happens. Crash. But you can't put yourself in that situation, as far as I know. I don't think you can make yourself do that. It happens to you. But you can, every time you're unhappy, dissolve the emotion, that bit. That creates the disturbance and the situation. You can dissolve the emotion. If you've suffered enough, you'll be prepared not to accept the emotion, not to accept the unhappiness. Until then, no matter how spiritual you want to be, no matter how much you want your mind to stop and be able to be in the peace, no matter how much you want to feel at one with everything, it won't work until you've had enough suffering, enough unhappiness to say, I'm not having it anymore. I'm not accepting it. I'm not having this. I'm going to dissolve this. I'm not going to allow it to take me off, take me into my imagination. I'm going to dissolve this now. And when you get to that stage, you then start moving. Every emotional experience is another step, another step, another step. Every time you get unhappy, angry, frightened, worried, every single time you do that, you know, this is another step I'm taking. I'm dissolving this right now. Another step, another step, another step. That's the process. That's the method, the technique of making emotion conscious. And if you're a follower of Eckhart Tolle's teaching, for example, I know very little about it, but read a bit about moving into the pain body. Now, of course, Eckhart Tolle spent time in the teaching of Barry Long as well. After it had already happened to him, so the mind had already stopped to a certain extent, but he was in the transition period of understanding it, and he spent the time with Barry in his teaching. And Barry talked this. So sorry, there's a fly making a bit of noise there. I don't know if you can hear it or not. They're all over the place now. So when Eckhart Tolle talks about holding the pain body and moving into it, this is exactly the same thing. Holding the feeling, the emotion, discomfort, just holding it, and you merge with it consciously if you've suffered enough. Thank you.